And welcome to our webinar and expert conversation on cybersecurity in a post-COVID world, new challenges and opportunities. And we're with Rohit Tamma, Senior Manager of Microsoft. A bit more about Rohit in a moment. I'd like to start by telling you how to use the controls for Webex. You'll have a Q&A button with the question mark. That will allow you to ask us questions for Rohit, and we will collect those for the Q&A at the end of the webinar session, where Rohit will take them live. You have a chat button where you can communicate with us during the session. Remember to use all panelists so that we all see it, and hit send. And I'd like to start with a poll today. And hold on a second. First poll is going to be 2 questions. And the first question is, what role do you have? And the second one is, how are you feeling today? I'll give you about a minute or so to answer that. What's your current role? And just on a scale of thumbs up or thumbs down or somewhere in the middle, how are you feeling today? On day 270 of the lockdown. And we have a number of students here today. And again, I'll give you about another 20 seconds or so to enter your answer. And do remember to hit submit. Okay, and you can see Rohit is here to take a look. Let me, while we're looking at the poll result here, introduce Rohit. And he is a senior manager at Microsoft. He currently leads a cyber defense team that detects and responds to real-time attacks. He has established assurance programs and cloud security requirements and compliance. And he is the co-author of the books Practical Mobile Forensics and Learning Android Forensics. And we're very glad to have him here today. Welcome, Rohit.
Thank you, Stuart, and I'm glad to be here as well.
And I'd like to start with a question. Just in general, how have the changes in operations that the pandemic has driven, how has that changed the cybersecurity environment? And we're all working from home and using different devices and a number of other important changes in our lives, but how does that affect cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think that's a great question to start with, Stuart. And let's break it down into 2 parts, right? So let's first talk about what are the operational changes, and then we will talk about how those changes have impacted the cybersecurity. If we go 6 months back in time and think about the situation where lockdowns were announced globally, at that point of time, the priority or the top priority for a lot of organizations was, how do we ensure business continuity? Or In other words, how do we ensure that business runs smoothly? So from an IT perspective, this naturally meant supporting the remote work and having a proper channel established for the remote workforce to connect back to their offices or workforce online and continue to do their jobs. Uh, so in this transition, those companies that have already been investing heavily in supporting remote work rather found it easier to make the transition. But the ones who have not invested enough in supporting the remote work, they had to make or introduce a lot of changes overnight. For example, there are companies which started allowing users personal desktops or personal laptops to be connected back to the corporate networks. There have been instances where those services which were residing inside the corpnet or within an on-premise boundary have been exposed over public internet so that the employees can access them and perform their administrative actions. Similarly, there are a lot of companies that started adopting or having VPN related setups overnight without proper testing and without proper understanding of what is the right architecture for them. Similarly, there have also been a lot of companies that started migrating to cloud in this journey, because everyone came to understand that if the application is running in the cloud, then folks could access it from anywhere, from any location. So there is an overnight migration to the cloud as well. So all of these are some of the operational changes that have been triggered because of the COVID situation. And the important point here to understand is all of these have been done in a very short span of time, where there is not enough afterthought for security or for security testing related activities.
By the way, Rohit, on that point, I heard an executive, and I haven't been able to track down the quote, but I did hear an executive say early on, if they had told us we had to transfer everybody to work at home, we would have told them it took $10 million in 6 months. And when it happened, it took 3 days.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about. Yeah, great point there. So now coming to the impact of these operational changes on cybersecurity, right? Let's talk about how they have affected. I think what we have talked about till now, we can call that as a scramble phase, where enterprises were forced to make these changes in order to support the remote work. And all the operational changes I have just talked about, they're going to have both short-term as well as long-term impact on the cybersecurity. In short term, I think there is a lot of increased attack surface that has come up, that has resulted from things like unmanaged machines now connecting to the corporate network, or exposing of assets to the public internet, and also deployment of new untested technologies like VPN and other stuff. And for security teams in short term, this is a huge challenge, as you can understand, because they will have to now rapidly start modifying their existing processes and also technologies to adapt to this changing risk. And on a long-term basis, given that remote work is here to stay, and also given that we are now talking about options like permanent work from home and so on, this is going to have a tremendous impact in the way cybersecurity is going to shape up in the coming days. For example, in order to support the remote work, there will be a lot of infrastructure-based changes that will happen in the enterprise setup over the next few months or over the span of next few 1 to 2 years as well. So this will result in realignment of the existing security goals that the organizations have. And this will also result in adoption of new security models. Like, for instance, zero trust is something that a lot of companies have been actively looking at right now. And in the backdrop of people working from home, there also will be a need for increased security monitoring that has to happen, right? So companies will start thinking about what are the technologies that can help them in increasing the security monitoring purview as such in the next few months or years to come. Stuart, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Now that we've talked about the changes in the environment, what are some of the specific threats that are arising in cybersecurity now?
Yeah, so if you're talking about the specific cybersecurity threat types, I think the first thing where we have seen a clear trend in the increase of number of attacks is the RDP-based attacks. As soon as the remote work challenge came into picture, and when companies started thinking about what is the solution that can overnight help them enable people to connect to their machines, remote desktop connection is the first thing that people found as an easy fix. And if we look at the stats in the month of March and April, there have been millions of RDP servers that have spun up, which have been exposed over internet, right? So naturally, these led to remote desktop based brute force attacks, where attacker would be trying to brute force log into these machines that support RDP connections. And in a lot of cases, we have also seen that these servers that have enabled RTP connections are not even running latest operating systems. In fact, there are reports that state around 20 to 25% of these have been running old and outdated operating systems, which have reported bugs publicly available. And once an attacker is able to break or guess a particular password for an RDP endpoint, and once he's into that machine, from there we have seen attackers installing ransomware and moving laterally to other machines in the network to compromise them and so on. So this has also resulted in an increase in the number of ransomware attacks that we have seen in the past few months. And other than RDP-based attacks, we have also seen a significant increase in the social engineering and phishing-based attacks. Of course, phishing is not something new to the cybersecurity world. We have been dealing with it from almost more than a decade now. But in the wake of COVID, we have seen several COVID-based scams, trying to impersonate health organizations across the world. And one of the common themes that we have seen in all of these phishing-based emails is the fact that they start to target the weakest, link in the whole chain, which is the human emotion. For example, we have seen COVID-based scams, which send emails stating that click here to see the report of COVID cases in your company as such, right? This is very enticing for an employee to go and click that link. And once you click that link, all sorts of malicious actions can happen. They could steal the tokens, or they could drop a malware onto your system, and so on. And apart from this, another area where which has also been a target of attackers is the VPN based attacks. As I mentioned in my initial discussion, that several VPN based softwares have been used overnight by the enterprises without proper testing or understanding of those softwares. So in several cases, there are unpatched VPN servers that were spun up. In some cases, there were default passwords that were left for the VPN admins. So all of these have resulted also in increased targeting of the VPN related attacks as well.
Just a lot more exposure to a lot of different attack points,
Yeah.
So what strategies are companies adopting to counter those threats and protect those endpoints?
So the strategies might vary from one company to another based on what is their current level of maturity in terms of the security processes. But in general, right now there is a increased focus on new security models like zero trust, for instance. This is something that has come to forefront in the backdrop of the pandemic situation that we are in, and this is a very hot topic right now in the security industry about adopting zero trust network. So I'll just take a minute to explain to the audience about what it is and what is the problem that it solves. In traditional IT network security, it is based on the premise that we have a perimeter, and inside the perimeter we have all the assets that are being protected. And if you are outside of this perimeter or outside of the network, then it is extremely difficult for you to access any of the resources that are inside. But once you are inside the network, then you have a free hand at everything that is present inside the network. Now, the bad thing with this sort of an approach is that once an attacker is able to break in, he will have, access to entire resources at his disposal. And then he's going to go after the crown jewels in your environment, the ones that hold the most critical and sensitive data. So the starting point can be just a small machine that is sitting inside a network, but he can move laterally from one machine to another, exploring the network. And finally, he would eventually land up at the most important or the sensitive ones. So Zero Trust Network tries to address this problem by proposing a model where nobody is trusted by default. And any access to any resource is granted only after strict verification of both the user who is trying to connect and at the same time the device which is trying to make the connection. And you would not be having access to all the resources, but you will be having access on a need-to-know basis, which means there is a very tight access controlled mechanism that is implemented, which will restrict the access. And as you can understand, right, in the current situation of remote work, everybody is talking about how do we support remote work in a more secure way. And that's where the Zero Trust comes into picture, where it not only solves the problem of remote work, but also proposes to do it in a more secure way. Yeah, so that's about Zero Trust. Some of the other strategies that the companies are looking at right now is, we talked about increased adoption of cloud in the beginning, right, where cloud solves some of the problems with respect to access. And once data is in cloud, you can access it from anywhere, from any device. So I think moving to cloud might be simply about lifting and shifting the data and resources overnight, but having a sound security strategy in terms of cloud is going to need some bit of time and some bit of experience. For example, all those enterprises that are now moving to cloud have to now answer questions like, how do they measure the security of the resources that are running in the cloud? And how do they keep monitoring these resources on a day-to-day basis? And what does it mean from a security compliance point of view? And do they have enough tools to measure the security posture of these resources? And if yes, do they have the right security personnel and the teams who understand the technology and who can take right action in case of a compromise or in case of any attack on those resources? So cloud security is something that the companies will be looking at in a very big manner. And apart from this, I think there will be a strategy to figure out how to enhance the security monitoring at every level, because earlier we had a process where everyone comes to office and we have all of the monitoring related stuff, firewalls and all that stuff within the office, and we keep monitoring them. But now everyone is dispersed, apps are moving to cloud, and in some cases they're moving to multiple cloud providers. So there has to be a more unified way of tracking and monitoring these workloads that are running at different places. And some of the ML and AI based solutions that are available in the cloud that can scale up to the number of events that are coming from these devices and coming from these workloads is also something that companies will be very much interested in the coming days.
It's an interesting discussion because it's like the immune system of an organism, where it's not just the skin that protects the organism; it's the each cell in its own immune responses and defenses. That sounds kind of like a working definition of zero trust. So how would a company go about implementing zero trust? I'm sorry, did I freeze for a second?
Yeah, but I got the question. I think you were asking about how do we implement zero trust? Is that right?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
Yeah. So zero trust is not a single product or a tool that companies can adopt overnight. It's basically a security model that is based on the foundation of certain principles. For example, multi-factor authentication is one of the very strong principles that is part of zero trust. So what it proposes, for example, is that if there is a resource and if somebody is trying to access, let's say a user is trying to access that resource, before granting access to that resource, he needs to be authenticated through multi-factor authentication, which means it's not sufficient if he's just logged in with his corporate username and password. He should also be authenticated using a different form of authentication, whether it is authenticator app or whether it is a phone-based authentication. So this is a principle. And now there will be tools that will support this particular principle. And organizations need to figure out the context in which they are talking about the authentication, and wherever applicable, they need to start implementing the MFA. And similarly, network segmentation is one of the core fundamental principles in zero trust. And what that proposes is that if you have a network, let's say let's talk about the corporate network. This needs to be segmented into smaller chunks of network, or segments as we can call them. And each segment needs to be isolated from the other segment, so that even if one of the segments is compromised because of an adversary attack, the other isolated segments are not affected because of that. So once again, this would need implementation in terms of understanding what is the existing architecture and how do we segregate into different segments and how do we implement it. So that is something that companies have to again figure out on a case-to-case basis. Apart from this, there is also the idea of restricted access, or access only on a need-to-know basis, which means that no one would be having access to everything by default. It will only be on a need-to-know basis, and it will only be for a certain time. Let's say you would want to perform an administrative action by connecting to a very sensitive server. Now, you will not be having access to that server forever, but you will be having access, let's say, only for a specific time period. Let's say only for a couple of hours, or maybe for 8 hours on a specific case-to-case requirement. So these are some of the core principles, and as I mentioned, it's going to be a journey for the companies in adopting this. Because this is a transition to an entirely new way of enforcing the security and new way of running the infrastructure within the corp. So basically it takes a company to understand what is their current architecture, where are they in the journey of zero trust, and then try to fill those missing pieces in if they have not included them yet.
Yeah, I'm curious, by the way, just to, on a side note, it's one thing if the company has an internal infrastructure. It's another thing when they've moved to the cloud in all or in part, and now part of the infrastructure is controlled directly by a third party. So how do the third party controls of the cloud provider and the company's internal controls interact for zero trust?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question, Stuart. I think if we are talking about the journey to cloud, right, we would notice that the cloud providers who are there in the market, they do provide a lot of security-based tools and a lot of security-based options for the users or for the organizations to track the security posture. But ones who are moving into the cloud, the ones who are adopting the cloud, need to understand what those options are, and they need to come back and apply what does it mean for their companies. And this could mean different things to different companies. For example, if you are in the domain of finance, or health sector, then the controls might need to be more stringent. But if you are in, let's say, an e-commerce sector, there might be some other controls that might come into play. And of course, there is the angle of privacy, where now we have a lot of consequences about where the data is stored, who has access to it, who is accessing it in the cloud, and all of that. So I think the biggest challenge is if someone is moving to the cloud for the first time, then it's going to take some time to understand what tools are available for them to leverage, and then apply it to their environment before moving ahead.
Good. That's a great answer. How does this all impact on the demand for cybersecurity professionals, and especially ethical hackers who are going to be testing the defenses?
Yeah, so I think we have been, seeing multiple reports about the shortage of cybersecurity professionals, and we have been reading about it from multiple sources. But let's talk about it in a more logical way, right? I think as long as we see more users coming online, and as long as we see more work moving online and more processes getting digitized, it is inevitable that cybersecurity, the need for cybersecurity professionals will also evolve at the same pace. And some of the things that we have talked about as part of the strategies that the companies are adopting, right? For example, let's take zero trust networks. And if a company is trying to implement zero trust networks, and if they're trying to implement device-based identity and multi-factor authentication, they would definitely look for experienced professionals from identity and security space. Similarly, for enhanced security monitoring, they would look for people who are well versed with using the monitoring tools and who can take them to the next level, right? So the demand is definitely going to continue as long as this this journey to cloud and this journey to digitization across the world continues. The demand is going to continue. But I think one point to note here is that along with the demand, there will also be a change in the expectations of the roles and responsibilities for these particular jobs or for these openings. For example, if I think about the demand for application security based jobs 5 years back, the qualifications were mostly around someone who has good experience in dealing with vulnerabilities, someone who has penetration testing experience, and so on. But today, if we see, the same role has evolved into a more mature level, where companies are now expecting not just the AppSec-based knowledge, but also exposure to developer pipeline, for instance, because that would help them to implement the idea of DevSecOps, or the developer-based DevSecOps model in their companies. So similarly, even in terms of tier one roles in SOC, earlier they used to look for people who had just the monitoring experience, but now companies are looking for people who have not just the monitoring experience, but also someone who is comfortable in scripting and writing Python-based scripts or PowerShell-based commands, and who can help them in automate the day-to-day operational work as well. So, just to conclude, the demand would continue to grow in the coming days, but at the same time, there might be, different set of expectations that the companies may have for some of these roles.
And do you have some guidance or tips that you would give to somebody who's either a fresher who's entering the field, or maybe somebody who's experienced in some other technology aspect or operational discipline, but would like to look at entering cybersecurity as a career shift or change?
Yeah, I can share a few pointers from my experience, and I would request the folks in the audience to pick and choose the ones that might work for them. I think the primary step would be to have increased awareness about the multiple domains and the multiple variations of jobs that are present under cybersecurity field. For example, we have security monitoring as a space, application security as a domain. We have security engineering, we have auditing, compliance, security, penetration testing. So there is a huge variation under the bracket of cybersecurity. So the first step I would recommend is to take some time to understand the breadth of this particular field. And once that is done, I think the second step will be to build on your existing strength or the existing talent. For instance, if you are coming from a development background, then naturally the application security or source code reviews kind of roles might be more interesting to you and might be ones that will help you to excel. And similarly, if you have inclination towards catching bad guys, then roles like security monitoring could be of interest to you. And let's say you're someone who is interested in problem solving and designing high level architecture, then security architects could be the right choice for you. So I think it's important to understand what is your existing skill and also understand what variations are present in cybersecurity and to connect the dots between these two. And in fact, in my experience, some of the best people I have worked with in cybersecurity are the ones who have come from different domains purely out of their interest in the cybersecurity space. And like I mentioned, I have seen folks who have come from a pure dev or programming background, and they have excelled in areas like source code reviews and penetration testing and so on, because that will help you to develop sound foundational knowledge. And then on top of it, if you start understanding security, then you will have a complete end-to-end picture in a better way.
Just to follow up on that, I'm curious how you've seen people who have an operational background who have looked at the security problem from, this is something, people are attacking me, this is something that I need to understand how to defend against. When they decide to become more conversant in cybersecurity principles and move into that as a career, does that operational background give them an advantage?
Yeah. So if you're specifically asking about someone who has operational background and let's say a database administrator or a system administrator, and who has seen some of the attacks that involve databases or systems, then I think that's a very good segue to think of cybersecurity, because like I said, at entry level, you don't need to be an expert in any of the domains that are present in cybersecurity, but you need to have sound knowledge about systems that the hackers would normally perform. And he would try to identify the gaps or the security holes that are present. And like I said, this could be in the applications, or this could be in network, or this could be at any level. But it's basically an act of breaking the given application by simulating some of the payloads and attacks that hackers would normally use. You are on mute, Stuart.
I thought I was unmuting myself, but I think I muted myself.
Okay.
Thank you for that explanation. Rish asks, with 13 years of experience in QA, how suitable is it to make a move into cybersecurity?
Yeah, so I think it depends on what kind of QA experience he had for these 13 years and what kind of tools he's used to. If it involves certain level of security, certain level of testing, or functional testing using Selenium scripts and other kind of stuff, then there could be a very minor overlap with security testing. But yeah, so I think it depends mostly on what kind of QA experience he has, in which domains he has in those 13 years.
Okay. We have a couple of questions on data security. One from a YouTube viewer, YouTube live viewer, Ashwarya. Another one from a Webex attendee, Amit. And the two questions are: how can we secure our important files from hackers, and how do we handle accidental insider data breaches?
Yeah. So I think coming to files, right? So if we are talking about the files that are inside the corporate environment and we're not talking about the personal files, then we have certain controls like, rights-based access management, where, for example, if you're talking about MS Word or, related to any of the documents that we handle as part of MS Office, then you could also manage the rights in terms of who can have access to that particular document. For example, I could set a permission saying anyone within my company can view this particular file, or I can have a permission very granular saying these are the only set of people who can open this file, even if they have. And if the file lands in the hands of other people who are not, in the allowed list, then they would not be able to open the file. And the same rights are also replicated in some of the cloud providers like Office 365. So if you have a document that you want to host online and then you want to share it with only few people, then you can do that using the rights management within those kind of tools.
And the other question had to do with handling accidental insider data breaches. I guess both prevention and amelioration after they happen.
Yeah, so there are certain data loss prevention solutions that can help with this, both with intentional and also unintentional leak of data. So once we tag the documents and files with right level of access, then there are certain data loss prevention tools that can be deployed to track the movement of these files in and out of the machines and in and out of the network. And based on certain anomalies, we would be able to flag in case, let's say, a very highly sensitive document is being sent to personal emails or to other recipients who are not intended to receive it.
We have a couple of questions on zero trust, one of which is just in general. Dinesh asks, wouldn't zero trust and other models in the wake of this current situation or post-COVID situation, wouldn't they require new and expanded IT investments? And we know that organizations are purse shy, so would that slow down adoption of these new techniques?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and both the points are valid, right? On one side, there is a need to support the remote workforce, and they need to do it in a right way, a secure way. So there will be interest in technologies or in security models like zero trust for sure. But on the other hand, you are very right in pointing out that in the wake of current situation where there is a general budget reduction for the IT as a whole, the cybersecurity budgets are also going to take a hit. So that's when I think the prioritization of the existing security goals will come into picture. For example, before COVID, a lot of organizations already had a list of certain priorities for the next 1 year. But now all of those have to be reprioritized, and budgets and including security personnel will be invested in supporting new frameworks like zero trust rather than chasing something which may not be a top priority right now for organizations. So that also leads us to a situation where over a period of next 1 to 2 years, as we invest more in the immediate problem of securing remote work, there will be a technical debt or there will be a security debt that is going to build over a period of time because we are not acting on the pile of other gaps that we are already aware of.
That makes sense. The idea of technical debt in security is a little bit frightening.
Yeah.
One of our guests asked, does zero trust mean that we're going to have to reduce the use of single sign-on?
No, single sign-on does not have any such implication on zero trust. Single sign-on is a process where you sign into once, you authenticate once, and that identity verification will be carried along to the other portals or other resources that you sign into. So that will continue to be the same. But where zero trust might come into play is you may not be having permanent access once you're signed in. In other words, the amount of time for which you have access to a particular resource might be limited, and you might be asked to re-authenticate based on certain policies, certain conditional policies that might come into picture.
We have a number of questions that regard certifications in general, and do you find that certifications are helpful to the learners in seeking employment after their programs?
Yeah, so I'll just share my personal opinion, and it's not necessary that that's everyone should hold the same. But I think certifications can definitely take you to one level. In other words, they will help you to move in the right direction, and they will give you a good structure and outline, especially if you're new to the cybersecurity, right? They would be very helpful to you to navigate through and stick to a specific outline and be able to say, yes, I have covered these, and now I'll be able to work on these. But I think it would be helpful only till that level, or they could help you in the initial screening if you are applying for certain jobs. But once you are sitting in an interview, then what really matters is what level of technical expertise and understanding you have about the fundamentals of that specific domain, which is what is going to land you in that job, right? So as long as certifications are used with the right bent of mind, that they would give you a good navigation structure, a good direction, then totally go for it.
Very good. And what are I guess one of the questions is, how does one choose? I think we've talked about this. How does one choose between the different areas in cybersecurity? I think if you go back over and reiterate what you said earlier about playing to your strengths, that would help.
Sure. So I think, like I said, the first point is to be aware of what are the different opportunities and different work streams that are available in cybersecurity. And the second thing would be to assess what is your current strength. For example, if you have come from dev background, then programming is your current strength. And then you need to connect the dots between programming and one of the work streams that is present under cybersecurity called, let's say, application security or source code reviews that is present. Similarly, if you're coming from, let's say, networking background, then you would have great advantage if you are part of network security monitoring teams. And like I said, if you're passionate about problem solving and looking at high level architecture, then a security architect role might be the right choice for you. So in short, identify what is your existing skill and try to connect the dots with one of the work streams that is present in cybersecurity.
I do have a question from a audience member who is pursuing a doctoral program, and she's very interested in what topics in security challenges would be good areas to focus on for her doctoral studies.
So I think Dockers and container security is something that's very niche right now. And I think especially the Dockers in some of the cloud providers, like whether it is AWS or Azure, right now there is a lot of interest to see what security controls can be identified for those that are running in these cloud environments. Although we know generally about what is Docker security and what are some of the vulnerabilities that are applicable for Dockers, right now there is no straightforward way of scanning and finding out what are those gaps within the cloud provider environment. So that could be an interesting space to look at.
The user Cha asks, can you elaborate on application security and code review and how to get started in that area?
Yeah, so application security is a field that deals entirely with reviewing web applications or web services and trying to find out what are some of the vulnerabilities that are introduced at the coding level. For example, if you have heard about SQL injection or cross-site scripting, these are all vulnerabilities that are identified as part of application security analysis. And code review is a part of it. It's also called static analysis, where the reviewer will be looking at the source code that is present, and he or she would be trying to identify what are some of the gaps that are introduced at specific lines of code. And they would be articulating what is the impact of those vulnerabilities. What can an attacker do by exploiting those bugs that are introduced in the code? And similarly, there is also something called dynamic analysis as part of application security, where you will not be looking at the code, but you will be looking at the application at runtime and trying to figure out what those bugs are. And that's more close towards the penetration testing that we have talked about, where you simulate something, you enter certain payloads and see how the application is responding. And in that process, you try to identify what could be certain bugs. So if you're asking about how do I get started with that, there is a good documentation that's available in site called OWASP, OWASP, and you can just Google for OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. That will just give you a good introduction to what kind of vulnerabilities we are talking about, and from there you can go further.
I think the last question that we'll take, so what are some of the major factors that you need to consider? This is from Rashmi. What are some of the major factors you need to consider in cloud security as opposed to security for on-premises infrastructure?
Yeah, I think there are multiple factors that need to be considered. For example, if you're talking about on-premise, there is a very tight control around who has access to what, because we have Active Directory in on-premise, which defines who can sign in, who can access what kind of resources, etc. But if you're moving to cloud, then that visibility is lost very quickly. And especially if you're dealing with multi-cloud environment, then it becomes even more complicated to find out who has access to what and all of that. So access control is one big challenge. Similarly, the second thing is about security monitoring, right? So we have security tools deployed within the corp environment, which will monitor inbound and outbound traffic and try to find out if there is something malicious. But how do we replicate the same level of controls in cloud? You deploy the application in cloud. Now, how do I know what is happening behind the scenes? And if there is an attacker who has compromised it, how do I even get to know? Right. So that's another challenge around how do we figure out about the security monitoring piece in cloud. And the third thing is even in terms of enforcing the controls, right? How do we enforce those controls? For example, in CorpNet, there are GPO policies where you can push certain policies onto the machines of the user. You can restrict him from accessing certain sites using a proxy-based servers. But how do we do the same equivalent enforcement in cloud? So that enforcement angle is also something that comes into play. And of course, lastly, the compliance perspective, in terms of where is the data actually residing? Is there enough backup for this data? Who is accessing this data? Everything that revolves around data privacy is also something that's very much important to consider as one of the factors.
That's a very comprehensive answer. I appreciate that. And at this point, I know that we have a lot more questions that have come in, but we don't have time, unfortunately, to take them all. So I'm going to say thank you to Rohit for being with us and ask you if you have ways for people to keep in touch with you.
Thank you, Stuart. I would like to, just take a moment to thank Simplilearn for inviting me. And I would like to thank Arjun and Stuart from Simplilearn for helping me and giving me enough support. And also all the people who have taken time to join in for this session today. Thank you very much.
Okay. And can people, besides LinkedIn, can people contact you on Twitter or other venues, or what's the best way?
Yeah, I would prefer to use LinkedIn. That's something that would be more comfortable for me. Yeah.
Okay, very good. So thank you, Rohit. And at this point, I would like to turn it over to Shivani Singh, who is the Chief Admissions Counselor for Postgraduate Programs in Cybersecurity. And she has a brief message about one of our new programs in cybersecurity. So I'm going to give her the ability to share her screen. Hello, Shivani. Hello, Shivani. Let me do the following. Hold on for a moment. Hello, Shivani, are you there? Oh. We're having trouble with her audio, unfortunately. Give me just a moment. Apologize for the difficulties here. And going to go ahead and present this material, a postgraduate program in cybersecurity in cooperation with MIT. MIT was founded in 1861. It's ranked #1 in technology among universities in the last several years and has a very prestigious record. Its engineering programs are among the best in the world, and we've formed a partnership with MIT for a postgraduate program in cybersecurity, which covers a number of the skills that Rohit has described and takes you through to a full cybersecurity expert certification. It includes content from MIT faculty. It gives you the full postgraduate program certification from both Simplilearn and the MIT Schwarzman College of Computing, and a certified ethical hacker certificate from the EC Council. So we recommend this program for people who want to enter cybersecurity and achieve a high level of expertise and certification, and their certification supports virtually all types of roles within the cybersecurity area. And the price is 24 lakh in India, $5,500 in the rest of the world, and it's open to anybody with a bachelor's degree with 50% or higher marks. People with a non-programming background can apply because you will be given programming training and certification during this postgraduate program, and you do not have to have prior work experience. So with that, I want to say thank you. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulty there. We're not able to get audio from Shivani. And we want to invite you to join us for our next webinar. One week from today, we will be having a webinar, slightly different time, 9:30 p.m. India time, which is 8 a.m. on the West Coast, 11 a.m. on the East Coast in the United States. And that's Glimpsing the Future, How Cloud Computing Will Continue to Change the World, with Quentin Hardy of Google Cloud. And we'll be sending out information to all of our attendees today on how to register for that webinar. You can connect with us at Simplilearn on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we want to thank you all for being here today. We have concluded the webinar. So again, thank you, and it's time to exit Webex.